All right, friends, welcome to another episode of Culture Conversations. I'm here with my friend, Mike Larsen. He's from LA. He does know Snoop Dogg. Just kidding. And we're gonna talk about a lot, but first, Mike, I'd really love to hear how you came to faith. You have such a unique story. And man, why don't you just tell everybody watching and listening how you came to faith and how you came to know Christ?
Yeah, so in the 90s, I was introduced to methamphetamines. And I just gave every meaningful relationship up and for that drug.
How old were you?
I was 19. Yep, I had a child that had just been born. I was married at the time.
You were married at 19?
I was, wow. And we had my oldest, Daniel, and yeah, I was working for my uncle's moving company. And my coworker introduced me to meth. And as soon as I did it, I knew that I was in love with it.
Wow.
And
is it in California?
Yeah. This is Southern California. And then, yeah. And so, man, it was like, I did everything I could to get that, hustled my way through life, quit the job, left my family, left my kid. And just, it was really like roaming from house to house, selling drugs and doing drugs to the point where, I just gave up my whole life for it.
It was all consuming.
All consuming. So I just hustled my way through it. I stole what I could to support. And in 1998, and I say stole, but I did big crimes in the end because I got more desperate. And so there was a person that we had moved. He was a doctor in the community. And I remember when we moved his house, we moved literally like 200 carbine rifles. And we put it all in this walk-in closet in his house. And so there was a time where my uncle another uncle of mine gave me a job doing landscaping while I was steep in my addiction. And I recognized the house. And we were doing this guy's backyard, landscaping his backyard. And I knew this house was the place. And so I excused myself to the restroom and I went to go scout this place for the weapons. This would be like a huge score, right? And I went into the master bathroom and went into the master closet, and there was nothing in the closet to the exception of a jewelry box. And so I flipped open the jewelry box and there was two rings. And I grabbed one, put it in my pocket, closed the box, and I was going to plot to come back and get anything else I could in the house. And so I stole their garage door opener. And so got through the day of working and went home to my second wife. It's a tangled web.
How old were you then?
Oh gosh, I was 25 years old.
It's about 6 years.
So 6 years in my addiction, and found I divorced my first wife, found a girl that did drugs too, and married her. And so I could have this lifestyle and a woman. That would be great. And, or I thought it would be. And it was a train wreck. So I ended up going home that night, and my mom called me and asked me if I was at home. And I said, yeah. And she showed up at my house about 20 minutes later with the cops behind her. And so they arrested me, and I gave the ring back. My mom had asked me, did I steal the ring? I said, yes. And so 20 minutes later, she comes with the cops. And so I ended up in jail.
Did they have cameras or something?
No, they just knew it was my uncle, and we were the only two there. You know, and so obviously my Uncle Jim isn't taking it.
Right.
And everybody knows I'm an addict at this point.
Right.
My mom knew it. You know, my Uncle Jim was just trying to give me a break.
Sure. Which
he always has. And then, so I find myself in jail for the first time. And and so that led to that.
How long did you do?
They sentenced me to, they charged me grand theft.
Okay.
The first charge was burglary, and that would have been a strike and prison. but they reduced it because I had never been to jail before. Gave me grand theft, and I did a year in the county jail.
Okay.
It was there that, I know this sounds really tangled, but I had my wife and I also had a girlfriend. And I know it's awful, but
did your wife know?
No, not really. They knew each other. Okay. But it was in jail that I was writing her and my wife, and I was convinced in jail that I didn't want to do this anymore. And the first time they put me in this tank of first-time offenders, and it's like the boys' locker room, just really loud. People they're just being boys, right? And so I asked an old timer that was in there. I said, "How do you get moved out of this dorm?" And he says, "Well, there's two ways. You get in a fight and you get thrown in a hole, or you get released." And I said, "Well, I'm not getting released anytime soon." So first guy that walked in front of me, I just started wailing on him until the cops came in and pulled me off. And that old man was right. My next destination was the hole. It was there that these trustees would like throw books underneath. They take everything from you, so you had nothing. But the trustees would throw books underneath the door. And there was one book in particular there. It was called God's Prison Gang. And as the story goes, the book is about high-profile crimes. So Pretty Boy Floyd. There was this story in there about Jack Murphy. They called him Murph the Surf Murphy. They made a movie in the early 70s about him. He had stole the Hope Diamond out of the New York History Museum. He was a cat burglar and just a hustler. That's how he explained himself. And he ended up stealing that Hope Diamond and then getting away with it. Well, his buddies ratted him off and he ended up going to prison. Well, it was in prison that he found Jesus, and that's what the book is about. I had nothing, I didn't hear anything about the Jesus stuff. All I saw was this professional diamond thief, and here I am in jail for stealing jewelry, and I was going to case the place to steal more. And and I thought, I am a pro can't get away with this. Who do I think I am? Right. And I was sobering up, and once you sober up off of meth, you do start thinking straight. And I just said, you know what, I'm done with this lifestyle. And so I kept writing Sheila, and my
that's wife. Your wife?
Yeah, that's my wife now, who was my girlfriend then. All of us were using dope. And I put just ultimatums out on the letters, telling each one that I was done. And Sheila wrote me back with a letterhead. She got a job, and she said she's done too. Wow. And my now ex-wife, she wasn't done with drugs, and she continued to do drugs, sadly, for a long time after that. But Sheila came and picked me up from jail in 1998.
How long did you do? What was the full sentence? A year?
It was they gave me a little bit more than a year because I got in that fight. Okay. So they extended, I think, 30 days on my sentence.
Okay. How long were you in the hole?
I was in the hole for like 6 weeks. Yeah.
Describe that for people.
Yeah, it's a different kind of animal because as much as I hated the crowd, I think I hated the silence even worse. And so every book that they gave me, I just ran through and just kept reading. I don't even know how I graduated from high school because I don't ever remember reading books from front to back. But I read The River Runs Through It like 18 times. Wow. Because and that's a thick book for a kid that has never read a book all the way through. But
so you're just by yourself. There's no one to talk to.
Yeah.
The lights go out and the lights go on, and that's your life.
You get 3 meals. You get an hour a day if everything's perfect in there. You get an hour to get out, and what they say is get some sunlight, but it's really not sunlight. It's weird.
Are you with other people in that hour?
Yeah, it's a pod full of people. No, but you're individual out there in your hour, and so if there's any discipline going on, no one goes out. But typically we got to get our hour because, and that's where our shower was. Okay. So You were really hoping that nobody was stupid in there because you really wanted your shower. You wanted your hour, just to get out of that room. And then so.
Did you spend your whole sentence in the hole?
No, just 6 weeks. It was just disciplinary.
Gotcha.
And then they moved me to another jail to serve my time. And so I served the rest of my time. I got a job in the kitchen, which was a godsend because most of the fights and the problems and the troubles happen during the day when people are up, and the kitchen crew is up at 2 a.m. and in bed by 8
Nice.
In the morning. And so that saved me because as much as I really wanted to succeed at not getting back in that lifestyle, and it's so influential in jail, that people just come out being stronger criminals.
Mm-hmm. To make all those connections.
Yeah, make all the connections. And all these guys in county are going to get out soon, so they all have plans. Mm-hmm. And you're just like, well, it's just tempting. And so I was grateful for that time. Hindsight's very much 2020 when it comes to that stuff. So Sheila came and visited me a couple of times and then picked me up. It was on my birthday. I remember that I got released, and so she picked me up. And
you're 27 now?
Yeah, 27 years old at the time. Gosh, it just seems like a lifetime ago. And then I moved in with her at her parents' house, and we did. We managed to stay clean, get jobs.
Nice.
And
without Jesus.
Without Jesus. I had court order like AA or NA, and I just didn't really need it. I was done. I mean, I made my decision, and I was sticking to it. And so I actually went back to work for my uncle.
Wow.
At the moving company.
That's grace.
Yeah, and worked there for a while, and then ended up getting my commercials driver's license, and started my trucking career.
Nice.
In 2000, I think that was 1999.
Okay.
Yep, when I started driving truck, and so it was. I think it was right around that time that I ended up wanting to get a tattoo. And so it was 2000. And so I went into this local tattoo shop in my town, and I had no idea who this guy was. I never met him. I did have a pattern in mind that I wanted to get. Mm-hmm. And he had, I asked him, I said, how much for the tattoo? And he looked at it and he said, it's kind of big, so I don't know exactly how much it would cost, but I'll keep track of the time and we'll just charge you $100 an hour.
It's pretty good.
Yeah, it was a great deal. I'm like, okay, cool. Sounds great. And so I scheduled an appointment for the next day. And so that was a Saturday that I went in, and he started tattooing on me. And so there was small talk, getting to know him. What's your name? My name's Kelly. I said, we were just talking a little bit, and he finally starts tattooing on me, and I start noticing that some people are coming into his shop, and they're asking him the same thing, the same question as I asked that Friday. And he said, they're like, Kelly, how much for this tattoo? And he said, oh, I don't know. It's a pretty big piece. How about we schedule a time, and we'll just keep track of the time, and I'll charge you $50 an hour. And I'm like, oh, wow, this must be like really good friends, that's cool. Got the bro deal, He was a biker dude. He looked really cool. He was all, yeah. And so the next person comes in, and it's the same question and the same answer. Kelly, how much for this tattoo? He's like, I don't know. We'll just keep track of the time. $50 an hour, $50 an hour. Third person, fourth person, same question, same answer. And finally, I'm like, who are these people? And he goes, oh, these are people from my church. You should come check it out. And I'm like, well, maybe I should. And
maybe get $50 off on your next session.
Right. I was attracted, what I know now is I was attracted to the grace that Kelly was giving to his brothers and sisters in the church.
Yeah.
And for me, just being an old hustler of the streets, I'm thinking, heck yeah, I could friend this guy and he'll hook me up with cheaper tattoos.
Right.
This is dope, man. Let's do it. Right. I got this. And so he was really cool. I thought, man, it'd be great to get to know the guy. He's got his big old chopper sitting outside. I'm like, man, this is really cool stuff. And so the next day, we go to his church, Sheila and I. It was just a little tiny church. I mean, it's scary. I mean, there was a bunch of bikers, and it was on the dirt road, and it was just really weird. But
were you a biker at the time or
no? No, not at all. Never rode a bike. I rode dirt bikes as a kid, but that's it. But we get there, and we're greeted by Kelly, and he's like trying to introduce me to everybody. The pastor comes up, and he's this guy that looks like Willie Nelson and George Carlin had a baby. It was just like, and he was just a cool dude, man, little short guy. And immediately all these people just want to give you big old hugs, those Christian hugs that are all extended. They just hold it for a little bit longer. And I'm just like, this is kind of weird. It's weird, but
man. It's awkward.
It's weird, it's awkward, but I mean, if this is it, I can handle this, like whatever. And just so happened to be Easter Sunday that week. And so they did this altar call, and Kelly got me up there and dragged me up to the front and made me pray the sinner's prayer. And I was just like, I didn't know what I was doing, man. And so we left, and I was just like asking Sheila, what'd you think? I mean, kind of cool, right? Like, and we agreed, yeah, it was kind of cool. Like, it was okay, and I really seriously thought, I'm like, man, this is going to be neat to get to be Kelly's friend, and I'm going to get a whole lot of tattoos from him, and it's going to be cheap. It's going to be cheap. It's going to have a discount. And so that was the sole reason why I went to church. It's the sole reason why I went to church. Again, I was attracted to the graceful gift that he was given to his brothers and sisters. So we kept going back. They invited us to a Bible study, midweek Bible study. We went to that, and I was really curious. I haven't had any church history really in my background, so other than some family members that I knew were Catholic. Okay. And so I'm like, okay, so prayer was somewhat part of the family stuff, and so I'm like, okay, this isn't all completely foreign, but I really wasn't understanding any of it. It was about a month or two later, can't really recall, but Kelly asked me if I wanted to be part of their motorcycle ministry. And so they have a motorcycle ministry, and they minister to outlaw bikers.
Nice.
Yeah, they outreach to outlaw bikers, and it's really, really cool thing. But I'm like, man, this is getting cooler by the minute. I've never rode a bike, but I'll be down. Like, let's do it. Tattoos and motorcycles and friendly people. This is great,
right.
All these guys, the way these guys look, I recall their looks from my druggy days, and they were all drug heads. And so to be surrounded by the same type of people, but without that negative influence was just awesome.
Yeah.
And so I agreed immediately, man. I'm like, yeah, I'll do it. And so they assign you an older brother, they call it, and you're going to become a younger brother. And the older brother is meant to disciple you and just kind of show you the ropes of the ministry. Well, the first thing he asked me to do is get a biker vest, a notepad, a pen, and a pocket Bible, and have all three of those, have all those things. And you have to have your notepad and your pen and your pocket Bible in your vest, and you got to be wearing that when you're ministering and when you're at the church. And I'm like, okay, cool. Well, the way it all worked out is when you would show up on a Sunday, all the bikers would circle up, and they'd kind of just debrief you of the day, what's going to go on, and they'll assign people some posts or whatever, and some welcoming things, and where these bikers would welcome in the cars, and then inevitably that one of the older brothers would ask a younger brother to pull out their Bible and read from a passage of scripture. And but I couldn't find a Bible for the life of me. I got my vest, I got my pen, I got my notepad, but I couldn't find a Bible anywhere. And I was afraid to ask anybody, because as word has it, or rumor had it, if you didn't have the things that your older brother asked you to have, that they would discipline you. And I'm like, what do you mean discipline? And so they were like, parking duty in North 40, you'd be pulling weeds, or you'd be doing something, taking out the trash. And I'm just like, that's just humiliating. And I think what really scared me the most was when we circled up. And there was like, seriously, there'd be upwards to 30 bikers sitting around there. And then I'm just trying to avoid eye contact with my older brother. His name was Gunner. He was a Vietnam vet. If you saw him, if you see him even today, from across the street, you'd avoid him.
Looks like a dangerous dude.
He just looks like a dangerous dude. But, oh man, don't judge a book by its cover. He is one of the sweetest men. God has regenerated that man's heart. And he is just one of the sweetest men that I know. At any rate, I didn't really know him that well at the time, and I'm just avoiding eye contact with him every time we circled up. And the truth is that I don't know how long I would have lasted there if he would have called me out and humiliated me in front of all them men. And that's what I was afraid of. In my time of being around people like that, those were fighting things, like we're gonna box now, bro. Like, right. And Gunner's an old dude, man. I didn't want to fight an old dude, and that's what's really going through my head. I'm like, wow, I'm gonna have to box this guy up and put him in his place. Like, that's so disrespectful. Like, but he's gonna humiliate me, and that's gonna be disrespectful, And so it goes both ways in that world. And so, man, I'm just seriously like, just please don't call me. Just please don't call me. And thankfully, he never did, man. There was it was about the 5th or 6th week that we're circling up, and I'm stressed out and I'm freaking out. And we get through the circle, we get through the church service, and I just kind of beelined it to the car, and I took my vest off and left Sheila home with our kids, and I took that vest off, and I didn't know what I was doing at the time, but I prayed for the first time. And I just looked up to the sky and I said, God, if you're real, and I'm embarrassed to say, I really said this, I said, man up, and you give me this Bible. I don't suggest anybody ask God to man up. That's kind of odd and disrespectful. But that's what I said. That's real, that's true. That's what I said. Right. I said, man up, you give me this Bible, and I said, no tattoo's worth it. And so I get in the car, and I'm waiting for Sheila to get our boys in the car, and she does, and she knows I'm visibly just upset and frustrated. And she had promised the kids John's Incredible Pizza, and this is like video games and bumper cars and pizza and playrooms and all this stuff, and I just didn't want to be there, so we just started arguing all the way there. And Sheila wins because she's mom, and we end up at John's Incredible Pizza. And so we pull into the parking lot, and I open up my door and I leave it open because I'm just basically being a jerk. And I open up my son's door, and I start working on getting him out of his car seat. Meanwhile, a brown 4-door Honda Accord, I still see it today, pulls up right next to me, and his window's down. And I remember telling him, I said, sir, I'm gonna be out of your way in just a minute until let me get my kid out, and I'll get out of your way. And I remember him saying as clear as day, still hear it. He says, it's Sunday and I'm in no hurry. I had no idea what that meant, but it stuck with me. And I said, okay. And so finally I wrangled my son out, and I sent him to the door of the pizza place and closed both doors, and I'm waiting for Sheila to get our other son out. And I get a tap on my shoulder, and I turn around, and here's this 5'0", 80-year-old man, and he has a pocket Bible in his hand, and he looked me dead square in the eyes, and he said, the Father told me to give this to you. Wow. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. This is just after you prayed that day.
Yeah. 20 minutes after I cried out the sky and asked God to man up, and by God's grace, He sent that dude that day. It was incredible.
What'd you do?
It still gets me. But for the first time in a long time, I cried. And I can't remember the last time I cried.
Right.
And I grabbed that little man up and gave him one of those weird, long, extended hugs that y'all do.
Give him the Christian hug.
Give one of them Christian hugs, and I thanked him for the Bible. And interesting enough, he got back in his car, pulled out and left. And his wife was in the car. I noticed that. And I said, I didn't understand it. I just didn't really understand it. So I'm just really crazy, like something's hitting me emotionally. And here's this Bible just out of the air, out of nowhere. Here's this man who has no fear of a guy my size. And, just if you'd have saw me back then, you'd be like, dang, I'm going to steer clear of him too. And, but it just happened. And I just started contemplating it, and I was like, okay, man, what, this really happened. I guess God is real. I guess God is real. And then I dared to pray another prayer that day, just thinking on the fact that that man took a left into a parking lot that he had no earthly business being in. Like, he was on a mission from God. Like I'm sure 80-year-old people love pizza and beer and video games, but
not the kids one, not the
kids,
right? The rowdy kids.
No, probably not. And then him leaving. And so I was just like, man, that just kept stirring in my head and in my heart. And I said, God, if you will allow me to take left-hand turns into places where I have no earthly business being, but you send me, and then I could be sensitive enough to hear you go say, go left, do that. I said, I want to do that.
Wow.
That was special. I want to do that. That was like extra special. That was just awesome. I want to do that. And
be the answer to someone else's prayer.
Yeah. And, and to be able to deliver something like that with God's help, and just have an ear to hear the Holy Spirit's nudging to take a left. Honey, I got to go here. And he's in no hurry. It's Sunday. Like, Sunday must be my day that I just listen to the Lord and I go where he tells me to go. I mean, I don't know. I've never seen the guy since then. But since then, God has asked me to take a lot of left-hand turns that made no earthly business. And that was like really, so that was my dedication. I just said, Lord, let me take those left-hand turns. And so that ended up going into prison ministry was the first one for me.
Wow. So
going back to the jails, I started in LA County, and I thought God set me up in that one. I was learning a little bit about repentance and sin, and I thought that he opened the door for prison ministry for me so that I can go in there and remember all the crap I did in prison, in jail, and just confess that. And then I promised that I'd never go back. And then like 4 months later, I'm back in the prisons again, serving. And oddly enough, I did that for 5 years. We would go up and down Southern California state penitentiaries, preaching the gospel and evangelizing. And oddly enough, the Surf Murphy was one of the headline speakers.
No way.
Yeah.
You got to meet him.
I got to meet him.
You tell him the story?
I did. He actually had copies of those books, and he signed it for me. I still have it on my shelf. Great dude, just ambassador for Jesus, and that's all he did before he passed was ministering to the prisons. Yeah, interesting stuff. But yeah, my life has been a series of left-hand turns since then too. And so pastoral ministry was one of those.
Before you go there, I'm interested, because if I recall us talking in the past, was that not a Gideon's Bible? Yeah. Okay.
So we were doing some street evangelism in Central California, and we were parked had a booth right next to a Gideon camp, and I just never put two and two together with these guys, and so I knew obviously it said Gideon's on the Bible, and then so I was there at this parade that we were evangelizing at, and they were there, and I'm like, hey, I got one of those Bibles. Let me tell you how I got it. And so I shared my testimony with the guy that was there. And then he said, wow, we'd love for you to come out to our camp meeting and share that testimony with our members. They'd be really encouraged. And so I agreed, and I went to their camp meeting. It was in Tehachapi, California. And I shared that testimony. And then the word got out about my testimony. And the Gideons really love testimony speakers for the encouragement reasons.
Sure.
And so I ended up getting offers like every other weekend to come out to camp meetings to share that testimony. And that turned into like state conferences. And then it turned into, it turned into this 3-year like circuit that I was doing every other weekend while working a full-time job. And they're flying me out and paying me for it. And they're like, the money was really good for a guy who's driving a truck.
Sure.
I'd share that 12-minute testimony, and they'd give me $300 and feed me and fly me back home. And
that's a win.
I was like, that's a win. And so I ended up like 3 years in, and I was doing the California Gideon's State Conference in California. It was in Palm Springs, California. And I was the first testimony speaker. The second testimony speaker was Ryan Reese. He is the son of Raul Reese, and Raul Reese is a pretty famous Calvary Chapel pastor in Southern California, on the radio, and his son, he's pretty popular right now too. He's got a pretty good ministry going on. Great guy. Well, he has a testimony. Ryan's got a testimony like mine. Ryan used to own Osiris. He owned Osiris skating equipment. Okay. And he was on the Vans Warped Tour, put a lot of cocaine up his nose, and it came to the end of his drug use, and he stole the Gideon Bible, and his claim is that he got saved on a plane.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Reading a stolen Gideon's Bible.
Yeah. The Gideons love awesome. That, by the way, man. When they say, they love that because they put the Bibles in the hotels, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so Ryan, I share my testimony. Ryan shares his testimony. And his dad, Raul, gets up there, Pastor Raul Reese, and he starts preaching on the importance of getting the word of God into the hands of people. And in a sense that I've never heard it before, because he started explaining it as John 1, the word of God that spoke all things into existence. Like he starts in Genesis, and then he comes over to John 1, and then he says, the word of God became flesh and dwelt among us. And for the first time ever, I connected this Bible to Jesus. Now, I had this Christian testimony, this answered prayer, but I was being convicted at that moment, really even crushed in spirit. Like I felt heavy conviction that I had this testimony, but I didn't know this Jesus that Raul was talking about. And I ended up driving home from Palm Springs that day, and I'm just like, what in the world is going on in my heart right now? And I felt like I just need to start reading this Bible. And I got home and was greeted by Sheila. She greeted me at the door, and she immediately says, look, she says, when you're done saving the world, your family might be here. Wow. And so this whole thing's like coming down now from now my family, and now this weird conviction that I've never felt before. Like, and so I'm just like, God couldn't possibly ask me to sacrifice my family for $300 on a weekend, right? And I'm like, so I said, I'll stop it all. I just don't know what's going on. I shared through my conviction too. I'm like, I'm just going to I'm going to stop doing this. I'm going to stop doing the Gideon stuff. And I just think I just need to read this Bible. And she was like up to here with my traveling and not being home with the kids. And so she's like, well, whatever, as long as you're going to commit to being with us. So I did. And I started reading that Bible, Chris. And man, the church that the church that I was going to and where I met Kelly their theology was whack.
But you didn't know it.
I didn't know it. I mean, there was intellectually, I'm listening to some of the stuff that they're saying. I'm going, okay, I'm going to try to trust you. But then I started reading, and I'm like, seriously, how did you come up with those conclusions? Like, that's not what it is saying. Right. And admittedly, I was young and still had a lot of that pride. And so I didn't handle it very well at all with these pastors, with zero respect. I just immediately was like, I started questioning them, calling them out on it. In person? In person, yeah. Not publicly, but in person. Sure. And I just couldn't see how they were coming to these conclusions. They weren't hyper Pentecostal, but they were Pentecostal in their approach to theology. And so a lot of oppression with some of the stuff, like, you know, if you don't have enough faith, and that's why you don't have things. Right. And I just couldn't, like, are you kidding me? That has nothing to do with this passage that you're pulling that out of like a rabbit out of the hat. Here, look. I'm like, that is not what it says. and it's way out of context. And I had no idea that God was bringing clarity of his word to me at the moment. And I couldn't understand why they weren't reading it that way. And so it didn't take too long before we weren't getting anywhere with the pastors. And so we decided, like, we got to leave. And so I had a friend of mine in the Christian biker world that was taking a position up in the high desert at a Reformed church. And he was a Reformed guy, didn't even know what Reformed was at the time, right? And so he asked me to come check it out, and I did. We did. And man, everything that I was reading, he was affirming in just doctrinally and theologically. And I'm like, this is legit. I mean, I was feeling that conviction again there, like I never have before. Like, now I know this Jesus, but now I think I really need to confess I need him. And so it was like the first time conviction of my own sin and my need for a savior. And that was falling over my entire family, that conviction. And so it wasn't too long after that Sheila and I and the boys were baptized.
Wow.
At that church.
Man, let me just open that up for a second. So do you think, at what point along that journey from that biker church, you get the Gideon's Bible, you're traveling with the Gideons, you're convicted you don't know the Jesus of the Bible, you start reading the Bible, you start coming to these, like, at what point in that journey, now you're at this Reformed church, you're getting baptized, when do you think you're actually born again?
Seriously, I believe that God regenerated my heart at that Reformed church. Because I was in it for the money with the Gideons. I was in it for the money at the church. I was in it for the pleasure of riding motorcycles. I mean, even the prison ministry stuff was like, they'd let you take your motorcycles out there and show you're off. And so it's just like this real pride thing. Yeah. I would even fabricate stories of my testimony to prisoners, which is ridiculous because you can't do any worse than what they've done.
Right.
It's just stupid.
You're making it worse than it was
stupid. Like they would look at me and go, I'd tell them, it was interesting. I'd tell them the story about the Bible and you'd watch people respond to that. But as I was fabricating, like I was a bigger drug dealer than I was, in the high desert, nobody responded to that. Like, and that's their normal. Like, and you don't even know, like, but when I started testifying to the truth of what happened that day, the inmates would respond to those things. But then I'd leave there going with this conviction, like, you're just a liar. You're a fake. You're a fraud. You're a fraud. And 5 years into that, they give you this cross made out of cell bars to award you for like serving for 5 years. And it's just this constant reminder that of my sin in those days.
You still have it?
I do. Yeah, it sits on my shelf today. But it was weird. Like, it was all about me. And
let me pause you for a second there too. So one, I think it's really interesting that God draws people in so many different ways. And here you have this like years of drawing before you were actually regenerate and born again. Yeah. Like that was what, a 5-year process maybe? We first stepped into a Reformed church in 2006.
Yeah,
you said about 99, 2000. Yeah. So that's one. And then like you're doing ministry as an unregenerate person, like admittedly.
Yep.
And now God is like being so kind to you as to bring you along to the truth of Jesus and his atonement and all that for you. And now you're like, I need him. Yeah. I need his grace for me. And he's doing it to your family as well at the same time.
Absolutely.
So he's drawing them at the same time he's drawing you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great, man. That means I'm thinking like for our people or people watching this, man, you just never know what God's doing and how he's doing it and what the process, because it's so different for everybody.
Yeah. And I say never give up on God. I mean, I was giving my wife every reason to leave me. I was bragging about my awesomeness all the time about what I'm doing in ministry, and everybody saw through it. You know, everybody who really knew me saw through it. And then so I say that there's the old saying, fake it till you make it. Mm-hmm. God is faithful. Yeah, even when we're faking it, God is faithful, and his promises are everlasting. Mm-hmm. And so if it wasn't for God's faithfulness, I'd still be out there spinning and hustling. And that's what my whole life was until God convicted my heart of my sin and my need for him. Yeah.
So now you're at this Reformed church. You understand the gospel. You're born again. Your family is converted. And now you guys are getting baptized.
Yeah. It was interesting. We didn't announce that we were going to this church, but there was about 40 people that followed us there
from the biker church. Wow.
And God really after that gave me a heart for them because I thought, man, I need to disciple these dudes because they're indoctrinated with bad doctrine, you know, and I don't know about their salvation, but I do know about mine. Mm-hmm. And so I just started asking the leaders there, and the leaders obviously put eyes on me because at this point I was ordained as a pastor at the biker church. And so I had Pastor Mike on my chest, on my biker vest. I immediately took that off because I didn't want to be associated with this church because of what I was reading and some of the confusion that I was seeing. And so I took all that off. And so by the time I got to this church, I'm just like, and listening to this pastor preach and teach and serve, I'm like, don't call me a pastor. Like, I am not a pastor. Like, and so I was really adamant about that. But these 40 people or so were still calling me Pastor Mike.
They saw you as that, yeah.
And so that put a spotlight on me along with 40 people coming to your church in 1 or 2 weekends. That's quite a deal, right? And so the lead pastor immediately puts his arm around me. He's like, hey, let's go do lunch, you know? Right. And so I'm having the convictions. I'm not a pastor, man. You know, I couldn't hold a candle up to this guy and his preaching and teaching, and just a wonderful Bible teacher. And so he just started befriending me, asked Sheila and I to join his community group, you know, and he just started putting me around leaders. Nice. And that was super helpful because I immediately started to get discipled by Pastor Jeff Ludington. And then I was taking what I was learning from Jeff and distributing it to the people that I was bringing.
Those 40.
Yeah, it was 40. Yeah. And so I was just regurgitating because it was so good. And so we would hold a biker breakfast. Like we brought all these bikers to this Reformed church. It was a mess, a little messy. Dudes wearing bandanas, like next to a guy wearing a suit. That's
cool, man.
It was cool, not for the person wearing the suit. I can
imagine, right. Not that old time church guy yet.
And so we had to teach like reverence, you know, just like to the bikers, like, hey, you don't need to wear a bandana in there, man, and you can love your neighbor by not scaring them. You know, like seriously, right. You don't have to be scary. Like we had some scary dudes that hung around us, and so, but yeah, so there was a lot of teaching, a lot of discipling there on how to love your neighbor in those ways, and so eventually there was a lot of people that came around because these are great people too, you know, and we could learn a lot as a biker community from these folks that have had marriages for 30 years, you know, like
absolutely
wonderful stuff. And so it was a few years, or it wasn't too long before Jeff asked me if I wanted to commission as a pastor in their denomination.
What denomination was it?
It was the Reformed Church of America, RCA. Mm-hmm. And so, which we're not part of anymore, which that's another podcast for another time. But so he asked me, and we prayed for a while and fasted, and if this was the route for us. And so finally it was affirmed that I would do that. And so that was about a 3-year process for me. Okay. And Jeff just gave me some simple instructions, and It was two things. He said, I need you to pour out everything you know, or you think you know, as far as theology and doctrine and ecclesiology and church and all that stuff. And he didn't use those words because I didn't understand them at the time. But I want you to pour all that stuff out. And then the second thing is, he says, and I can't have you on any stage while you're going through this. So you have to agree to not be on any stage. And I said, I thought to myself, as soon as this guy hears me preach, he's going to tell my stories, he'll have me up there in no time. Yeah, still a lot of pride. Yeah, I was going through it. But it was like 3.5 years later before he let me preach.
So he was just discipling you, pouring in, reading books, I'm sure. And
lots of books. Yeah, Jeff was actually the leadership development guy of our region at the time. So I was like his crash test dummy when it comes to the syllabus. Cool. And it was good because I'm getting so much, you know, and it was so rich, a time of learning. And I preached that message. And, you know, if you're in a church for some time, like 3.5 years is a long time to get to know a lot of people, and you learn to respect a lot of people. And so you're like, you look at some people like matriarchs and patriarchs of the church, you're just like, oh man, these are seriously awesome Christians. And so it was interesting. I preached that message, and I can't even remember what I preached on, but I started getting all these emails in my inbox. And Chris, there was like, seriously, like 60 emails, and the majority of them was like, why'd you say this?
Oh, wow.
Why'd you say that? They're criticism.
Oh, no.
Not, I mean, very little encouragement. And from people that you like in the community that you're like, whoa. And so I gathered up all those emails, and I was just like, whoa, these people hate me, you know? And God's still like digging the root out of this self-pride and this people-pleasing type of thing that I need people's approval, right? And so I'm taking all this in, and I take it all to Jeff, and I said, hey dude, I'm out. I'm not doing this pastoral thing anymore.
Did he read the emails and whatnot?
No, not until afterwards. But he says, what are you talking about? And I said, that sermon sucked. Everybody hated it. And he goes, yeah, but it wasn't good. You need a lot of work, but what do you mean you're going to quit? And then that's when I showed him the emails. I'm like, look, dude, I've got all these emails of everybody, a lot of people in this church, and they're telling me how bad I am. And he said something that changed my life. He said, Mike, who gives these people permission to speak authoritatively in your life? And I had to take that in for a minute. And then he says, why do all these people have a voice in your life?
Wow.
And so we had to really work through the idea of me receiving affirmation from the people who really love me, and even criticism of the people who love me. And so Jeff just said, you know, Mike, you need to pick your people who get to speak into your life authoritatively. He goes, you know, if that could be me. We've spent 3.5 years together, and you don't get to quit. You know, and that could be your wife. You know, you need to give her permission to speak. That, you know, and then you pick your people, but they can't tell you what to do. The crowd can't tell you what to do. And that was transformative for me.
How long did that take to actually root in you and become something you actually believed and lived out? Was it immediate?
I don't think so. I think I still struggle with it today. I still struggle with affirmation today. It's one of those deep-rooted sins. It's a weakness. It's something I struggle with.
Yeah, everybody. A lot of people do, if they're honest.
Yeah, I think it is. I'm the words of affirmation guy when you take the test.
The love languages.
Languages, right?
Yeah.
And so,
words is your number one.
Yeah, it's my number one. And so,
which is nothing wrong, by the way, with words of affirmation.
I agree.
Like, that's a good thing.
I agree. I had a really good friend of mine say, when people thank you, it's actually like God saying thank you. And, you know, like that's pretty cool. Yeah. Like, if God's people, if God speaks through God's people, then take the gratitude.
Yeah, we can receive that.
We can receive it.
Absolutely.
We can receive it.
Yeah.
And so, but we don't need it.
That's the difference.
Yeah. We don't need it because we have God's exception, and we have God's. But humanly speaking, I struggle there. COVID was a big one for that. Yeah, COVID revealed a lot of my chinks in my armor. And,
you want to open that up at all?
Can. I mean, it's short, but all the changes that COVID went through. I'm in the church as I'm leading this church. I have my gift sets, right? And that's organizing leaders around assimilating new visitors in, and just getting all that going. And we have a really good thing going. And then COVID throws everything in the air, right? And so it was just one day that I just felt like every bit of my giftedness is useless right now, and I just felt useless. We had one Sunday that it just went. Everything was going wrong. We were outside. It's now going to rain. We need to find inside. We're not going to have live service. We're not going to have people here. And I don't know what came over me, but I started preaching, and I had a full-on panic attack. I thought I was having a heart attack.
Oh man!
Yeah.
Did you stop preaching, or did you keep going?
I actually gathered myself, started breathing again. That's really what was going on. I was just out of breath, and I finished. But the next day, I found myself in my doctor's office because I didn't know what happened to me. But so I don't know how that's tied to like the people please, but the value and worth thing. I ain't got nothing. Like I can't bring anything to this. I'm preaching to a camera right now. Right. This is so weird. Like I love the people. I serve the people. That's what I do. I shepherd people, and now I don't have any people.
Right.
And so it was just really strange. Like, so kind of an identity crisis again, and needing a little bit more affirmation, if we want to tie that together. Yeah. But that led to a full-on, I'm losing it. I'm 48 years old, and I ain't got nothing to bring. That's hard to,
right.
That's hard. So yeah, so it revealed some things in me, and I had to get some help. Yeah.
And I want to talk on that because you and I have had a previous discussion about that and getting that help, and that's fascinating. So let's pause that.
Okay.
Back to your lead pastor is like, you're not quitting. Don't let these people speak authoritatively into your life. You need to pick several people who you trust. Yeah. God's approval is number one, and if he approves of you, then these other people get a much lesser, weightier voice in your life.
Sure.
Then what was the next progression from there?
Yeah, so I just, they hired me on a little part-time, it was like more like a stipend at the church while I was studying. They were kind of buying some of my time to study. And then I commissioned in 2009, became a pastor in the RCA.
Nice.
Yeah, and then they gave me, it was just more of an elder kind of pastoral teaching position, or discipling position, and more like a community group leader, if you will. Like, so they just gave me a stipend to do that, and then so I faithfully did that. Jeff was transitioning in 2012 to Oasis, this Reformed church that we got saved in, was a replant of an old church, and so that's kind of Jeff's giftedness, is revitalizing churches. And so that he was off to the next one in 2012, and so he pulled up Pastor Vinny Hankey, who's an Acts 29 pastor too, in the lead position, and they offered me a full-time position, which as a kind of an XP guy or associate pastor. And that was just an absolute another left turn that God was asking me to take. I had a lucrative job, really well-paying job, and company truck. And I mean, we were doing great financially. And the job that they were offering me was like $38,000 a year and no insurance.
Oh man, and that's in LA.
No, we were actually, but it was Southern California. So, but the area that it was the area of the high desert of Southern California. So that would have been okay for like maybe a single couple, I don't know.
But not for a family.
But not for a family.
Not especially if you're making already a decent wage. Yeah. And now you're going to take a serious cut. Yeah, serious cut. And, but we really felt like God was telling me to do it. And so Sheila and I prayed and prayed and prayed, and we decided to take the job. So January 2012, I started a full-time position at Oasis. Nice. And so, yeah, and it was exciting for the first month until I realized that it wasn't going to work financially for us. And so, interestingly enough, I had a friend of mine from a competing company, trucking company. He called me up and he said, "Hey, I heard you're not working for Jerry anymore." And I said, "No." And he says, "Well, we've got this position open." And I'm thinking, well, maybe I did make the wrong move. Mm-hmm. I had talked to Jerry before that. That was the owner of the other company. He's like, "No, I ain't got any other position open for you. We filled it." And so I thought, well, maybe this is it. Maybe I made the wrong move. Maybe we didn't really hear from the Lord. And so I said, "Well, why don't you send me what you got, what you're thinking?" He came back and it was like the same money and less work. It was just like, this is good. And so I called up Sheila and I said, "Hey, Tim called or sent over the offer for this company and it's really good." And Sheila's exact words were, "Mike, I think the devil's trying to give you a job." Whoa.
And I went, whoa. And she goes, "Why don't you just go to your elders and ask them for more money and tell them what's going on?" And so I'm like, okay. And so that week we held a meeting just for this. And I asked them, and I told them my predicament. It took like 5 minutes. They came back and said, "We'll give you more money."
Nice.
so I can stay.
Look at that.
Yeah. And so we were able to afford insurance after that.
Look at that, man.
Yeah. And so, so we did ministry there for 2 years. And in 2014, I was called to Encounter, another revitalization.
Which was an Acts 29 church?
It was not at the time.
Okay.
Yeah. It was an RCA church. And so, interesting story there. They were without a pastor and they called in the denomination to help them figure out what the future of this church was in Bellflower, California.
4 acres in Los Angeles
area.
Which is quite a lot of property in that area.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And so that was like, there's 3 options for that place, and that was one of them, was to sell the property and give the money to church planting.
Okay.
The second thing that they came up with, the RCA came up with, was revitalization. Well, apparently that church had tried that several times in the last 10 years, and it never equated to anything. The third option was a replant of a new church on this location, new name, new pastor, new core team. Like, let's get a new, and so they agreed to that. The people that were there agreed to that. And so the core team they had already. They had a handful of the 30 to 40-year-old folks that were born and raised in that church.
Wow.
Like really wanting to see new life come to the church. And so that was really, really cool. So what had happened is that they were just filling pulpit supply for 2013, and I was part of that. And so I came down and I preached for them. It was a Palm Sunday, and the church was planted in like 1935.
Oh man.
Yeah. So I'm sitting there like thinking, what's going on here? This is going to be like their 73rd, like Palm Sunday message, I'm like, I don't feel like preaching another Palm Sunday message to this congregation. And so I got down there and I was just like, all right, open your Bibles to Revelation 2. And I'm just like, we're going to find out who we are. what church are we in this? Like, so I started preaching about the church in Ephesus and how they lost their first love, and we need to get back to our first love.
You weren't even the pastor yet, or were you?
No. I told him, I said, I'm not going to preach another Palm Sunday message. Y'all have heard enough of those. The history of this church having Palm Sunday messages are deep. I said, but you haven't heard one like this, I promise you. And maybe you have it, but I'm going to give it to you this way. And I preached Revelation 2 and really calling them to love their neighbors. You see, the church is a Dutch Reformed church in their denomination, and they thrived. They planted in 35. The church started to grow. They had like 3 different locations. They were given this property, these 4 acres, and they built this place in 1950. It cut the ribbon in 1958, and this church has been in existence since then. Well, those churches were thriving so much. I mean, their missional strategy was seriously have more babies. Like the families were all white, Dutch. You just go to your church. That was your church, and have more babies, and it worked. There was plenty of money. Missions were all about overseas stuff and putting pins in the wall. So you give to missions. You might send some people on missions, but very, very rare, like love your neighbor stuff. You didn't really have to. I mean, you had some heathen neighbors like that wouldn't go to church, but they were just like, oh, well, maybe they will someday, But they didn't really have to evangelize. Well, there's a lot to get into there, but there was like white flight in LA, where the community started changing in ethnicity and economically, and which drove a lot of the influence and affluence out of LA. And it pushed it east to like Orange County area, which is, and it's really the start of the mega church movement. These big monster churches, because they took all their money with them, big monster churches pop up in the hills of SoCal, saddlebacks of the world, the Harvest, of Calvary Chapel. I mean, all these big mega churches, Orange County, but they left like the working class with these churches, and no missional strategy to love your neighbor, because their neighbor wasn't like them. They didn't look like them. They didn't talk like them. They didn't go around the same social circles. They didn't even know how to engage evangelistically.
They were very other.
Yeah, they were very their own tribe. And evangelism was not even on their radar.
Here's what I found.
Oh,
he called forth Siri.
Yeah, evangelism, Siri. Evangelize, Siri. If Siri starts evangelizing for us, we're all in trouble.
That's right.
But it was interesting because there was several pastors that would come in to try to cast vision for evangelism in the neighborhoods, and the God bless them, the faithful that were still remaining there were in opposition to that. And then it became like worship wars. They wanted the choir versus the band. And so the 90s and all the way up into the 2000s, it just started to whittle down. People fighting for the choir and the robes, and not wanting to associate with people that weren't like them. That's about as gently as I can say it. I mean, even in 2014 when I got there, there was one dude that would sit by the door. We had already changed the name. And
To Encounter?
To Encounter. They had changed it before I got there. So they tried to do all the dirty stuff that would make people mad before I got there, so I could just like start hitting homers, which God bless them. Thanks for that denomination. They did that great.
Right.
And so there's this one dude, and he'd sit at the door and he'd just say, "Welcome to Bethel." It was called,
that was the old name?
Yeah, the old name was Bethel Reformed Church. And he'd say, "Welcome to Bethel, welcome to Bethel." And so finally I just had to bring him in. I said, "Hey man, you're confusing people. We're trying to bring new people from the neighborhood and you're confusing them." And he was just so angry that all the change was happening. And after 3 or 4 years of sitting with white-haired people and hearing their stories, I understand why, to a point. But he was so angry and he wouldn't change. And he was.
Did he stay?
He didn't. Yeah, and that was kind of me a glimpse into like the culture of what it was.
The church culture, yeah.
And so it helped me. It was like the beginning of me like slowing down and realizing that there's a ton of history that has happened. You know, people were born and raised in this church and baptized in this church and got married in this church and died in this church. And all of that seems to be going away with a name change. And so all this history is going away with it. And so I was never sensitive to any of that stuff in the beginning. And so I'm just like, hey, you got to stop doing that without like being sensitive to how this is hurting people.
Sure.
And so it was like that realization that I needed to slow down. And then I just started having coffee with a bunch of old folks.
Nice.
Yeah.
Being sensitive, listening to the stories.
Listening to the stories over and over and over and over again. And there was one lady in particular, her name was Janet. She was a fiery lady, man. She was in her 90s. She had been going to that church for 60 some years, 70 years. I think even longer than that, if I'm honest. But she, even in her 90s, she was like, you know what the problem is, Mike? She goes, we're used to change. She said, nobody's driving around in Etzels anymore. We just want to have value and a voice in this place. We want to tell you that this is good and this is bad. Like, we've experienced a lot. We got a lot of experience here. And she said a bad word, but she said, if you want to put me out to pastor after serving this church for 60 some odd years, I'm going to complain. She used the B word there. I'm going to complain about everything and the color of the carpet. And I'm like, I hear you. You want value and voice. At the end of the day, Janet wouldn't get a vote, but her 60, 70 year faithfulness deserves value and voice.
Sure.
And so that was a huge lesson for me, is to slow down and listen and begin to earn respect from these folks in the sense that, and you know what, man, it was the best thing for me because I learned to love these people. And I've never seen anything happen that long. Like, I was 47 at the time, and I haven't done anything for more than 2 years.
Right.
Like these people are faithful.
They stuck it out for a long time.
One place, a long time. And I thought, isn't the generational church supposed to be like that? Like, I don't want anything more than my great grandbabies to be worshiping the same God in the same place as me. Yeah. And that's what we were greeted with at Encounter. We had like 5 generations in front of us. We had grandma, great grandma, mom, daughter, and a bun in the oven. Wow. And I'm like,
that's rare.
It was super rare. You know, we're watching these old folks like wiggle down the aisle, and me and Sheila just looking at them, looking at each other, and we're going, this is beautiful, man. Yeah. This is beautiful. And what is everybody complaining about? And so it was super helpful to get to know these people and their stories.
Wow. And praise God. It sounds like you learned to, as Peter would say, shepherd the flock of God among you, your flock, you know, instead of coming in and wrecking shop and being like, I got the answers and I'm going to turn this thing around. Rather, it was like, I'm going to listen. I'm going to be gentle. I'm going to care and guide carefully.
Yeah. And that's not my style. My style is go, go, go. And so I'm grateful to God that I got some really good advice from the people around me to slow down. And then just some insight from even the mistakes I made with that old man.
Sure. Yeah.
Saying, you got to stop instead of let me stop and hear you.
Wow.
Yeah.
How did you go from this point now to this church becoming a part of the Acts 29 network?
So the Reformed church that I came from was an Acts 29 church.
Okay.
And so we, from 2009, when I ordained as a pastor, I was doing everything in Acts 29. Acts 29 was a hot thing, you know, and we were eating it up. I mean, everything that Acts 29 and Relay was producing was just really speaking to my heart. And
Dave Kraft, Bill Clem.
All that stuff. And Dave Kraft's one of my good friends today. and just ate up every one of the books. And so super rich, quick, and good theology and stuff. Regardless of everything that happened in Acts 29, it just really spoke to my soul. Mm-hmm. And so when I came over here to lead this church, it was like, hey guys, this is the tribe that I'm part of, and I invited everybody to a conference in Reno, which was probably not the wisest thing, because it was right. I mean, we invited everybody there, and then that's when everything fell apart. And so it was like damage control and everything. All this, I'm asking these people to come over and check out Acts 29, and then everything was just like, oh my God, what's going on?
It's like 2012, 13, 14-ish.
It was 2014. Yeah. So I took that job in 2014. And so, I was at a conference, and then they were talking about healthy churches, which was good, but most of it was like reactionary to everything that was going on. And so you could feel that there. And then, of course, the buzz around everybody who attended that conference was always talking about the fallout and everything that was happening. And so it put a little bit of question mark with my lead team at the time. Like, do we really want Acts 29? And I'm just so stuck with their convictions and their theology. I'm like, please, let's pursue it. Sounds like they're gonna, let's just pursue it. Let's just go slow. I'm not going to ask you guys to. And so the good thing is the assessment for me took me like 2 years. And
mine took about 2 years as well.
Yeah. And so that was probably really good for the church, because we weren't committed like financially. We weren't really committed to anything. But I was committed to this assessment process, what they were asking me to do. So I just kept digging away at that, and a lot of back and forth. Of course, my past brought up a lot of stuff. And so, which I appreciate. It helped me deal with a lot of things. But the 2 years later, I took it back to the board, and I said, I'm ready to submit this assessment. And I really want us to, consider Acts 29. And I think they're going into a better direction. They totally were.
This would have been about what, 16 then?
16, yeah. And so, so I hit submit, and 2016 became an Acts 29 church.
Nice, nice, man.
Yeah.
And then a couple things I'm thinking about now. You've written a couple books.
Yeah.
5, one about to be published.
Couple, yeah.
Yeah, more than a couple. Did that start in 2020, or was that before 2020?
So that was 2016. So what I was trying to do, I never intended to go write a book. So the first book came out of a sermon series that I did in 2016, and the attempt was to teach the church to have apologetic answers for their neighbors.
Okay.
And so what we did is we solicited the church of questions that they would want to ask God, and how
God.
Yeah, just ask anything about God, about the Bible, about anything Jesus, anything ministry, anything life, and so we solicited the questions, and we got a bunch of them. And so we set out to do a series over the summer, and we ripped off R.C. Sproul's and called it "That's a Great Question."
Yeah.
And we set out to answer all these questions. We got tons of questions. So there was even a couple Sundays that we just did multiple ones, like the pets go to heaven, like the really easy ones, and then we took the time to really answer the ones that are heavy. And so the why do bad things happen? What's the point of suffering? And that came out of the second one. But what does the Bible say about homosexuality? That's a reality in LA, a big reality everywhere. What does the Bible say about alcohol? We had a 10-year-old ask, why isn't there any more dinosaurs? There's just...
It's a great question. Right?
It is a great question. Yeah. And so, why did God flood the earth? That was another one. And so we set out to answer them, and it just proved to be really fruitful. We were approached by a publisher, and because the 2 chapters, what does the Bible say about homosexuality and what the Bible says about alcohol, went viral. And so
Like on YouTube?
YouTube. And I'm a nobody, man. I'm not claiming to be anybody. Like, I don't have followers on YouTube, but it just went,
What happened?
went nuts.
What do you think happened?
I don't know. I think that they're just interesting questions, and the way we handled them. I mean, I kind of did preaching style to the answer of alcohol, but I did panels for the homosexuality one. I just didn't feel like I was the expert there, and so I think the draw was the people that I asked, and so that probably is what got the attention of people, and then it brought more people to the next one, which was alcohol.
That's shortly after Obergefell, same-sex marriage just legally passed nationwide in 15. So
right,
yeah,
and so it's pretty popular. Like so, and my angle on homosexuality was like, this is not an issue to deal with. These are people to be loved.
I like that.
Right, and we were very much. Biblical and conservative on our stances on marriage and gender and sexuality. But on the panel, I had a gay man who's been at the church there for 25 years.
Celibate. Nice.
Yep. And so I think the only juice that I brought to that was that I've had a conversation with him. We've sat with him. I've talked to him. We are friends. And I wasn't kicking him out of our church.
Right.
And that's what he was afraid of at our first lunch that we had, because as soon as he felt like as soon as I found out that he was homosexual or gay, that I'd ask him no longer to serve, no longer to be part of the church. And he had experienced church hurt before at that church from the older pastors, the pastors from the past. And so he was just afraid that was going to be a repeat. And so, but his story is that he gave up. He just had that conviction that he loves Jesus and he loves this man that he was with, but he loves Jesus more.
Love that. And
so, wonderful testimony, man. Like, I don't know how many people are giving up those feelings for the church anymore. And so it's like, I got this conviction, like I would storm the gates of hell with this guy because he's sacrificing more than many, than most people in the church today, because that's a big one.
Absolutely.
That's a big one, right? I don't know if Jesus, like I said, even before, I don't know that I could do this if Jesus told me to sacrifice my wife, like give up my wife for the church. And so, and that's not just about sex. That's about intimacy. That's about relationship. That's about community. That's all about so much that this man is sacrificed for the sake of not dishonoring his relationship with God. And so that's incredible.
It is. And
so I recognize that. I think that was my only part that I really had in that, but the panel was very informative too. So, And so the thought and idea of when the publisher approached us, I'm like, me? Like, yeah, you could do this. And so it took me about a year to get through the manuscript. And I just started to fall in love with the process.
Nice.
And the idea of like, this could pretty much help. This could help people. And this could be a resource that, and I didn't think that we were doing any like big sales or anything, but this could be a resource that we can give visitors.
Sure.
Yeah. This would be something.
Use it as a tool.
Yeah, just use it as a tool. And so that was the idea. And so we agreed with the publisher, and we began to write. I got through the manuscript in about a year. I had a great editor. He was a guy that edited for Relit.
Nice.
And then Dave Kraft was the one that did my forward.
Nice.
Yeah, so that was fun.
I met Dave in July of 21. He's a great dude.
Great guy. He coached me for about a year, and that's how I got in a relationship with him. And he agreed to do the forward, and that was a blessing because he is just such a good guy.
Yeah.
And then we published it. It was fun.
Sweet.
Yeah.
And then you wrote another one. What was your next one?
My next one was actually second edition to that.
Okay.
So I didn't tell
more
you
questions or what?
Yeah, because we set out to do it like every other summer. We're going to answer more questions.
Nice.
And in 2018, like the hot topic was suicide. And it's like when suicide was becoming trendy. And so
that series came out on Netflix. What was it called? I can't remember.
Yeah, remember the show? And so we added 2 chapters to it. Three chapters to the second edition. And there was also the Parkland shooting at the time. And so that question came up. We thought that would be a really good thing to answer. And then we decided to put my testimony smack bag in the back of it. An extended version of the testimony. And so we republished it, and we answered, what does the Bible say about suicide? And is it the unpardonable sin?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a tricky one to write, because we know that it's not I believe it's not the unpardonable sin.
I'm with you on that.
But and we don't and God wouldn't punish people who are sick or mentally ill or battling depression and things like that would lead to something like that.
When they're Christians.
Yeah. Correct. And so the fear was like, that would like give confessed Christians permission. And so we really had to angle that chapter on giving people more of a reason to live in the midst of hope, in the midst of mental illness. And so a ton of research for that thing came out, and a ton of study and a ton of prayer. And then the Parkland shootings too, just like, where is God when maniacs are killing babies? Like, where is God? And so we added those then to the second edition of that book.
Wow.
Along with my
Still
testimony.
relevant, right? Because every year it seems like there's several more school shootings.
Mm-hmm.
One just happened in Virginia with the football students
just
a
recently.
couple days ago.
Yeah.
And then a third book comes out.
Yeah, so I just caught the bug, and I started studying, and I wrote a book called Faith in Action, and it's based on the book of James.
Nice.
And so James is like one of my favorite books of the Bible, because James is kind of like me. He shoots from the hip. He just says it like it is. And
You adulterous people.
just like, yeah, I mean, your faith is dead.
Wail, mourn,
like,
and cry, you sinners.
and it's, I find that resonates to me.
I like James.
I do. It's so straight and forward. And then just trying to, I think my gifting is that in writing is like, I'm not a profound writer in the sense that I've got all these great, amazing ideas. I just make it simpler to understand. Clarifying. And then my writing style is super conversational. Like we're talking right now, it could be in a book. So you're going to get a lot of presuppositions, and that might frustrate somebody who's like, but it's like, whoa, that was awesome. Yeah. You're going to get that in my book, but I believe that God is whoa awesome, man. Like,
yeah, man.
So they become really easy to read and super palatable for anybody to read.
That's good. You're hitting the general audience. You're not aiming at scholars. You're not aiming at seminary students.
I will make scholars dumber. That's what I say.
All right, and then a fourth book comes out. What's the fourth one called?
This is just a little helpful booklet called Practical Evangelism.
Okay.
And this was something that, again, all of these things I create for my church.
Nice.
So I want people having apologetic questions they can answer to normal people with gospel answers. I want people to serve and to be active in the church like James calls us to be. Mm-hmm. And then practical evangelism is just a way to share the good news about Jesus practically.
Nice.
I think evangelism, the word, has like this stigmatism to it. It just sounds a little bit scary. And so I try to diffuse that by saying, hey, like, I've got this sushi place in Lakewood. It's called Mama Sushi. It is unbelievable. Chris, if you come out to LA, we're going there.
Nice.
And because you're not going to, and then I'm going to tell you what to get on the menu because I know this place and it's good. Mm-hmm. And man, we're going to sit down. We're going to enjoy this place because, man, it's the best sushi in LA.
Nice.
A lot of people disagree with me, but I don't care. This is my truth, right? This is my truth.
That's right.
What I just did for you is I became an evangelist for Mama Sushi.
Sure did.
And
I want to go.
Yeah. Right? And so I'm like, hey, let's break this down. Evangelism is just telling people about who you love and who loves you.
That's cool.
And so give a little practical steps through that, and teaching people how to approach their neighbor. And so it's like the 5 S's, super Baptist of me, but
But you're an RCA.
I know I'm really not. But yeah, so it's like, I ask people, like, first thing you need to do is search, like, who's your neighbor? Who is God put in your circle of influence? And then begin to pray for them, and look. And then the next S is serve. Like, look for opportunities to serve your neighbor, whoever that is. And so you could just develop some relational equity with them.
Yeah.
And relational equity is like any other equity. The more you invest, right, the more people will trust you, and so know that you love them. I mean, so people are not projects; they're people.
That's right.
And so people that need to be loved and served. And so look for ways to serve them, and it can be simple as taking the trash cans back up for them, or letting them borrow some stuff in the house, or I cut my neighbor's lawn. She's an older lady.
That's cool.
She doesn't get out much, like stuff like that. And just had an opportunity to pray for her and her husband. Her husband's dying.
Nice.
So stuff like that. So that leads to the next one, is strengthen. And so look for opportunities to really strengthen. My neighbor's husband is passing away. They've got hospice in there and all those things. And so I want to do everything I can to serve them, and in a tangible way. And so through prayer and through meals and through whatever I can do. Maybe your neighbor lost his job, and so they need groceries or something, something that you could strengthen them with. And then I believe through this, this is what's developing relational equity. And through that, God's going to open up opportunities for you to share your faith.
That's good.
That's the next S. And so why do we do all this stuff? We do this because God loved us. We love because God loved us first. We serve because God served us first. And then, I get in there and I talk real evangelistically. Sorry for the word, but there's a moment there where we're going to tell people about Jesus.
Yeah, it's gospel time.
It's gospel time, right? And so this is, and I try to make that as easy and as palatable and as deliverable as possible. And then we believe that God is going to save people. When the gospel's being preached, the Holy Spirit is going to regenerate people's hearts, and their neighbors and their friends and their loved ones are going to be saved. And then so the last S is to send. We're sending them to do the same exact thing because we want to see more people come to faith in Jesus.
It's good, man. It's helpful for people. It's a easy
20 pages
alliteration there. Oh, that's even easier.
20 pages, man.
That's
I just gave it to you. You could just.
Yeah. All right, and then your last one that's coming out, the 10th of December, right?
There's one before that.
Oh, you got another one?
Yeah.
What is it?
I thought you knew that one. That's it.
The Esther one? Is that the one
no, Esther's the new one.
Yeah, so
the
what's
one that's
the other one
unpublished, but the one before that is called Uncomfortable Grace. And this one was interesting too. Like, we had in 2019, we had prepared the year of sermons for 2020.
Okay.
And so coming out of Easter the plan was to go 4 weeks in the book of Job. And where is God in our suffering? Like, where is God in the midst of suffering? And then COVID hits, and it just like, do we do this? And so we're talking to the elders and praying, like, do we really want to go at this with everything going on in the world right now and everything stopping? So the answer was yes.
Okay.
Let's do it. Let's do it and use this as an opportunity to talk about suffering. And so we didn't want to really capitalize on COVID because we didn't know much about COVID. And there was a ton of people sick, but so what we decided to do was just survey a few families that have went through tremendous suffering to like kind of no fault of their own. That makes sense? And so we had people on each sermon come up and testify to how suffering entered their life.
Wow.
And these are people that, like I said, this is a church that has a lot of history. And these are people that have been born and raised in this church, 50 years in the church right now, right? And so the first couple was Chris and Nicole. Chris is an elder in my church. Nicole is the children's director in my church full time. They were high school sweethearts. They did everything to honor God in their marriage, before marriage, and wonderful people, love the Lord. Again, and then when all of their friends were getting married and getting ready to have kids, and they were getting married, and they were trying to have kids, they couldn't. They tried, but they were infertile, and so suffering into their life through infertility.
Yeah.
And so I told their story, and just kind of paralleled the book of Job through that. And just kind of, talked about the mystery of suffering and what God is doing in the mystery of suffering. And so there's a lot of parallels there. There's a lot of friends in Nicole's life that was trying to give advice, like Job's friends.
Yeah. His bad counsel.
Yeah, totally bad counsel that really hurt them in the midst of that. And so if those chapters could actually help people be more sensitive to people's pain and things like that. And so we did Carol and Milt Gilman in the book, and Carol has had 5 cancer diagnoses, a mastectomy, remission, and then next one comes, and the remission, next one comes. And these are just godly people that have been in that church for 60 years, 70 years. I mean, just amazing people that you'd never think, like, what in the world? Like, they don't deserve this. Right. Why did suffering enter their life? So we tell their story. Ironically, before we published the book, Milt, who was 78 years old, spry, he had a 20-yard lawn mowing business that he did every week. He gets sick, contracts COVID, 17 later is dead in a hospital with nobody can visit him. And so we added that a little bit into the story too, just like, where is God in the midst of this suffering? And then we shared several other examples of people in our church that suffering entered in their life. But those two just off the top.
What has that book in particular done for people? Have people really benefited from that?
Yeah, I call it uncomfortable grace. Not that grace is, like God's grace is uncomfortable, but uncomfortable suffering can be the catalyst to seeing God's grace, to experiencing God's healing grace, God's saving grace, God's and that has been super helpful for a lot of people. They didn't because I think a lot of people give up on God, and because God is the therapeutic God, or it's a God that they made up in their own image. It's a God that wouldn't want their kids to suffer but prosper.
Right.
And so we make that connection with Jesus and God's intention for suffering. Not that anybody wants to suffer. We want to wish suffering on people, but God can use our suffering for His glory and our good. And that can become a catalyst to make us more like Christ and strengthen our faith, not weaken it. And so we just have real conversations in the book about how suffering is not the lack of God's love or care for us, but suffering can actually lead us into a closer, more dependent relationship with God, that a God who promises us that one day there will be no more suffering, no more pain.
Good. The God who entered in to our suffering and pain and darkness. Yeah, that's good. Well, I'm glad that you mentioned that book, because I
didn't see it on the list. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's good. And then we have the new one coming out on December 10th on Esther.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
So again, just another book written out of series that we've preached on. The book of Esther doesn't mention God in it at all. And so I live in a culture, in a society right now where it just seems it's increasingly becoming more godless. And when I look at the news, you just mentioned that there's another shooting. Politically, everybody's divided. When you turn on the news, they're just set dead against you, and they're pitting against you, and everything is just another way that they can get you to hate each other around you. And it's just like, where is God in all this, right? And Esther's unique again, that it doesn't mention him at all, but God uses this little girl and her uncle to do extraordinary things to preserve God's people and advance his kingdom. And the famous line is that, Esther, for such, perhaps you were born for such a time as this, right? Could we actually, even in the midst of COVID and political tension and riots and racial tension in our world and everything that we're facing, wars in Ukraine, and can we really still believe that God is orchestrating things? And can we have enough faith to believe that God could actually use people like, not just pastors like you and me, but ordinary people, ordinary people to do extraordinary things?
That's right.
And so I think that is still true.
Me too.
And that God wants to use people right where he has us. And perhaps, this will give us, this will encourage us, even in the midst of everything that we are facing and living in and going through, to trust in God, that there's opportunities for Christians still, when everybody's getting canceled, that there's opportunities for people that stand for truth. There's opportunities for people that stand for Jesus, that love their neighbor, that even love their politicians in a way that they're trusting not in their politicians, but in God for favor, for favor in the midst of the conversation. So let's enter the cities and the governments. Christians don't need to retract right now. If God is calling you, you need to get in and trust in him for the favor and the outcomes, because the book of Esther will encourage you that it goes really well. And for them.
Especially when the odds seem stacked against you.
100%, right? And so, it's an interesting book. And so I parallel, there's no real parallel stories, but how I end each chapter is I answer the question, how does Jesus write us into his story?
Nice.
Now. And so we just kind of survey the story of Esther in a way that, again, I just make it simpler to understand. And then we answer that question, how does Jesus write us into his story?
Man. Yeah. Sounds great. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, man.
So all these books are available on Amazon. People can go on and grab a copy, and I would encourage you all to do so. And then one last thing, brother, before we end this. You did mention in our conversation just before we started recording that you're doing some stuff with the Gideons again. Yeah. Tell us about that.
That was pretty cool. I got it was just a cold call from somebody from the Gideons that asked me to come to Florida to do another convention. And one of their conventions, it was their international convention, which I didn't really realize. My experiences was that these are little conventions that encourage a handful of people. But
what do you mean by a handful of people? 100, 200 people?
Yeah. And so that's what I was priming for. But I got there and I didn't even understand the magnitude of this until I went backstage. I was going to speak Saturday morning, and I went backstage at 8 in the morning, and they had these sound booths, and there must have been 150 of them. Wow. And they were all stamped with names of countries, Spain, South Korea, and these people were manned in all these booths all over the world translating. And then I step out on the stage, I almost fell over. There was like 2,500 people in the audience. And I shared my testimony. It's on my website, mikelarsen.org, and on YouTube. It's the 2021, I can't remember, mikelarsen.org. But it was just an incredible, cool moment for me to share my testimony. And then that, of course, everybody that was there were Gideons from all other states. And so then I was getting asked to come and to the other states. My only caveat this time was that I have to bring my wife,
Yes.
or we're not going.
Love it, man. So she's good with that.
Oh, she was good with that. She's like, well, I hope New York calls, and I hope DC calls, and I hope, and so we did about a half a dozen of them at the beginning of the year, and so it's super fun.
That's good, man.
This is a ministry that is in decline in America, and so if Sheila and I can give up our time to go and encourage these folks who are, the average age is in their 70s, to encourage them to continue to serve the Lord in that capacity.
Giving out Bibles is a huge thing, man.
Yeah.
It really is.
It gets a little jaded, or at least shot down from Christian culture today, because of course we know that it needs to come with relationship and demonstration, and I understand that. But these folks have been faithful, and God's going to bless that. And so they don't know any better, and they are going to countries that they're handing out millions of these Bibles. And so I just want to encourage them to continue, and it did have a lasting change in my life.
Yeah, man.
Absolutely.
So. And God uses His word.
He does.
He really does. Man, thank you so much for spending this time and telling your story, brother, and sharing about your books and your life. We really appreciate that.
Well, I appreciate you. Thank you, man, for the opportunity.
Anything else you want to say to the listeners, watchers, before we? What's your church's website? So it's encounterccb.org. Okay. My personal website is mikelarsen.org, and you guys can check that out. You on social media? If people want to hit you up on Twitter, Instagram, anything? I'm not really big on social, but I mean, I have Instagram and stuff like that, but I'm not putting content out there. I will start promoting the Esther book here soon, so love for you guys to get a hold of that. But if you guys need to reach me on my website, if you want bulk orders, you want whatever, we'll give them to you guys at cost. We're not trying to make a bunch of money. That's sweet, man. We just want to help the church. That's generous. Yeah. Thanks, man. Brother, thanks for your time. Bless you, bro. Yeah.